Asia is a diverse continent filled with countless of cultures and history stretching back to some 5,000 years ago in recorded history. One of the oldest of these cultures became what is known as China. China has a record of history stretching back to 4,000 years ago, and in the period between the rise of its civilization and the modern era, they are credited with inventing noodles, paper currency, and nail polish. So when you're slurping noodles riddled with monosodium glutamate for breakfast, or applying that sassy nail polish for a soiree that no one will notice, don't forget to thank China. Because of this, China has become big and influential, just like a fat cat, playing a major role in determining the politics and even the course of other civilizations within Asia. As such, it comes as to no surprise that China has an overinflated sense of self-worth and demands other countries around it to kowtow to its whims. Up till today, that attitude influences China's conducting its foreign policy. China claims all the giant pandas in the world, for example. So if it asks you for pandas, you better give up your pandas, unless you want to be liberated. Welcome back to the Base Indonesian Show, where we discuss politics and culture and the random shebang. Today we'll be talking about China. I'm actually bored of talking about China, to be honest. Before the emergence of the Kuomintang, China was lorded by dynasties who reigned for a single decade to an entire millennia. The size of China's economy, manpower, and cultural power was so significant, many countries around it sought to emulate themselves like China, from the Korean Goryeo Kingdom, the Japanese Heian period, and the Vietnamese Nguyen dynasty, giving China an even stronger position in historical diplomacy. Its large manpower meant that it can field large numbers of armies that dwarfs the armies of medieval Europe, and China subsequently used them often to expand its borders or exact funds from its tributary states. Just like how American mafia exacts money from protecting businesses, China became the top dog in Asia for a long time. But up until the Qing dynasty, China lost its respect it commanded for millennia, because it was taken over by a bunch of PUBG players from the north. They're called the Manchus. The Manchus ruled the Qing dynasty into the ground. China then became the laughingstock of the world before going to a period of angst and bloody turmoil, and deciding that finally, yellow was no longer their favorite color. Now, red was the fad. In the present day, under Xi Jinping, China wishes to regain that international prestige they once lost. Having gone against the previous style of diplomacy and foreign policy as his predecessors Hu Jintao and Jiang Zemin, Xi wishes to see China becoming an even more important player in the world, as Xi realizes how important China has become in the global economy, and that no amount of Western institutionalism will ever stop China by relying on China's massive industrial and export output. China has the West by the balls. This entire realization defines China's relationship with its neighbors, with China continuing to put pressure on their neighbors and gain more power. While China pursues a zero-enemy policy and treats all nations with respect, never taking sides in international discourse, China does play favorites. And their favorites are Russia and Pakistan. Russia and China go back in history. Both nations have a common enemy, the United States of America, when Russia was still the Soviet Union. They both dislike America back then, and they both dislike America now for stationing troops at their doorstep. The economic sanctions have forced Russia to rely heavily on Chinese trade, and vice versa. China needs Russia's natural resources for their growing industry, especially since Russia is China's partner in China's Belt and Road Initiative. Both are major players in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and they seem to want to replace the Western global institution with their own form of institutions. China and Russia also sometimes collaborate on their military, having similar doctrines and equipment, with 99% of China's arms import coming from Russia, and China's Norinco Arms Company supplying weapons to Russia in Ukraine. Plus, Chinese men are known to be crazy about Russian women. There's even a dating site for Chinese men to look for Russian women. While both China and Russia are at the top of each other's lists, there doesn't seem to be any clear definition by any measure for the two. Both countries aren't militarily allied despite their close military cooperation, and both does not pursue the same overseas goals, with Russia attempting to create its own sphere of influence in the form of CIS, and China wants to use BRI and investments in Africa to propel itself as a major player. However, while they both pursue their own interests, it seems their cooperation hinges on the United States being its opponent in different fields, making this an enemy of my enemy is my friend situation. Only time will tell if the United States will remain friendly when the United States
is no longer an enemy.
One thing for certain is that China and Russia agree that they have special relationships despite their differences. Much like how America maintains a special relationship with Saudi Arabia for oil. It's so strange that they're so close, yet they haven't really signed any treaty yet. Almost as if they don't want to make sure the other side doesn't drag them each other into stupid, pointless conflicts. In hindsight, China and Russia are more than friends, less than lovers. On the other hand, Pakistan is extremely close friends with China. They collaborate both economically and militarily. China invests in Pakistan and Pakistan allows China to have access to Africa. Their relationship is sweeter than honey and harder than steel. Being close to China is so important to Pakistan that it plays a central role in Pakistan's foreign policy. Simple way of putting it, Pakistan hates India, as they always seem to be on the brink of nuclear annihilation. Meanwhile, China also hates India, for a multitude of reasons.
Again, the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Pakistan is a major partner in the BRI, and China uses Pakistan as a gateway to the Middle East and Africa, with ports in Pakistan seeing an increase of activity of shipping Chinese resources and other exports. For China to maintain relations with Pakistan is important to stay as the top dog of Asia, with India looming in the horizon with its big claims of being a superpower by 2024. China. You seriously believe India is going to be a superpower at that time? Cultivating relations with Pakistan is also China's way of staying in the good side of the Muslim world, probably learning that enforcing their ideals on Muslim countries is disastrous for their safety. But how about North Korea? Is China close with North Korea? Well, on paper, China is close with North Korea. Remember what I said about China not really being allies with Russia, but are more than friends, less than lovers? Well, let's ditch all of that. North Korea is the only country China has a military and economic alliance with. Both countries signed a treaty in 1961 called the Sino-North Korean Treaty of Friendship, Cooperation, and Mutual Assistance. If North Korea or China were attacked, one of those countries would come to the other's aid. Imagine coming to the aid of North Korea. And China has always treated this treaty with the shame of not being able to remember what you did last night because you were too drunk and would rather not talk about it. China treats North Korea as its annoying little brother it wishes to cut off. But because they're the only family each other has, they can't just do that. North Korea has done nothing but brought shame to China on the global stage with its threat of nuclear attacks on other countries. It even paid for North Korea's side of expenses when Trump met Kim Jong-un in Singapore. Look at Kim Jong-un's plane! Oh my God! The only thing North Korea exports to China is coal and more illegal immigrants. China really does want to be rid of North Korea, but come on, family comes first. You can imagine Xi Jinping having an entire wardrobe of useless coal somewhere in his palace. While things are looking great for China, we have yet to go farther east or down under. If it was China's choice to choose which of the two Koreas, China would definitely ditch its little bro, North Korea, for South Korea. China and South Korea's relations stem from their joint suffering from Japan, who wanted to take both of them and turn everyone into Japanese. I'm not kidding. The Japanese tried erasing Chinese and Korean, replacing everyone with Japanese name and forcing them to speak Japanese. They're crazy. Both China and South Korea tries to resume dialogue and tighten the gap rather awkwardly, as South Korea is a vassal state of America, and China being America's mortal enemy number 2. So, China continues trying its best to be South Korea's trading partner and make America jealous. While China and South Korea disagree on many things, one thing they will definitely have each other's back is on ganging up on Japan. Speaking of Japan, China probably has the worst neighboring relation with Japan. Japan is the 52nd state of the United States. Duh! It's responsible for 2 of its humiliating wars and killed a bunch of its people in rather inhumane ways. To make things worse, the Japanese government hasn't really formally apologized for its war crimes. You better start apologizing now, Japan. Japanese prime ministers apologizing doesn't count. China wants the entirety of the Japanese nation to apologize and pull a Dogeza. I don't know how to say it. Doesn't help that Japan is eternally sus towards China due to its massive size and foreign policy. Recently, things have been looking up for their relationship, except if they start looking down there in the Pacific, to the island country of Taiwan, or its official name, the Republic of China. Wrong! Seize this Western lie! Taiwan is not country! It's a rogue province of... For you to call it a country hurts the feelings of 1.44 billion people! Has a frosty relationship with the mainlanders. Both share a rather awkward position on who gets to be the official China, since Taiwan is ruled by the Chinese government preceding the Chinese Communist Party government. In this sense, both argue that their China is the legitimate one, with Taiwan arguing that they are the preceding government and that the communists are rebels, while China argues that they claim most of the land belonging to China. These days, Taiwan is distancing itself farther away from claiming to be the legitimate Chinese government and are focused on taking over the world through chips! While China hasn't really completely moved on and believes taking that small, insignificant island somehow produces the majority of the world's technological chips, will make China whole. And also the sea around it. This is a major source of contention between China and the rest of East Asia, as China's megalomaniacal tendencies freaks out South Korea, Japan, and the United States. On the other hand, in Southeast Asia, China is a bit more passive-aggressive, if not menacing. China seeks to enforce the 9-dash-line policy, where it lays claim to the entirety of the South China Sea. To do so, China has been relentlessly victimizing Vietnam, Philippines, Indonesia, and Malaysia. Vietnam and China has been at it over the Spratly Islands and the South China Sea, and Vietnam's endless paranoia makes it invest in the military more than any other Southeast Asian country. Surprisingly, this drives Vietnam closer to its former enemies, the United States. As French President Charles de Gaulle said, "Les gens do not have friends, they have interests." And China has been bullying the out of Philippines on the South China Sea. Rodrigo Duterte famously launched an aggressive campaign, leading all the way to the arbitration court at The Hague that secured the Philippines' bid on South China Sea. But that didn't stop Xi to say "f*** it" and ignored whatever the result was. So, relations between the two are very frosty. China seems to have a sugar daddy sort of relationship with Indonesia. While Indonesia is rough on China in the South China Sea, Indonesia has been making out with China behind the closet. China pours in a lot of investment in Indonesia. So when Indonesia wants a cool bullet train, China gives them a bullet train, despite Japan offering a better and cheaper bullet train. Most of this has to do with Jokowi's drive to build infrastructure, and his policy is reliant on foreign investment. While China seeks to build a hegemony on Southeast Asia, and Indonesia is the perfect target to make a close ally for. Indonesia kowtows to the whims of China, except when the South China Sea is an issue. No wonder Estonians believe Indonesia is a Chinese colony. Speaking of Chinese colony, they call Myanmar Little China. It's a place where in some places Mandarin is often used. Its military looks like the PLA, and then its lands are riddled with high-speed rail pipelines heading straight towards China. Myanmar is strategic for China because it allows China's access straight into the Strait of Malacca and more ports it wants to use for its BRI initiative. The way China sees Myanmar is how Russia sees Ukraine. China is fiercely protective of Myanmar and thus puts a sign on Myanmar discouraging any foreign influence on Myanmar. Meanwhile, Myanmar is politically reliant on China, with its government often having to get unofficial blessing from Beijing. So they let the coup happen as long as they don't flood the pipelines. In mainland Southeast Asia, China wants to trust Thailand as an ally so badly, but finds a hard time trusting Thailand as an ally. The thing about Thailand's foreign policy is that Thailand is willing to ally with anyone that secures its goods. America, the British, and Thailand were close since the 19th century, but when Britain lost its opening engagement in World War II, Thailand was quick to abandon them for Japan. In the 70s, Thailand was allied with Vietnam, but after the rise of the Khmer Rouge and fearing their invasion, Thailand ditched Vietnam for the Khmer Rouge. Because of this, countries understand that Thailand's foreign policy is as unstable as its government. So China is looking for ways to maintain Thailand's loyalty and make sure they choose the bros before the hoes, and make sure they choose the hoes, and make sure they choose the bros before the hoes. Other countries like Laos and Cambodia are completely neutral and friendly with China. Malaysia is pretty also neutral towards China, but is more inclined towards the West. Singapore has plenty of good ties with China, but again, they are more trading and economic partners than actual allies. Oh, we forgot one country, Mongolia! Mongolia throughout history has either been China's mortal enemy, China's servant, or China's master. Now it's just a part of China, but they're too lazy to govern it directly, so they let the Mongols govern themselves. Recently, China is a bit nervous with France being interested to uplift the Mongols to the modern age by giving them energy independence. To fight China directly is always a bad thing, as Princess Bride taught us not to fight land battles in Asia, except if you're the Mongols. All in all, China is a good neighbor to some and a bad to few. In an era of global capitalism, it's ironic how a supposedly communist country is even more capitalist than the capitalist West. China understands the power of money in the capitalist world and thus expedites its funds by investing into public works and infrastructure of other countries around it in an effort to build hegemony, slowly turning the American dream that undertones post-Cold War economic practices with the Chinese dream that Xi Jinping came up with. In developing countries with big population density, governments are starting to subscribe to the Beijing consensus model of economics that enables governments to tighten their grip on production and turning them solely authoritarian. Better explanations of the Chinese dream and Beijing consensus can be found in other YouTube channels that a quick search might help. But these concepts that are overriding the Western capitalist practice are a symptom that countries are slowly becoming more influenced by China. In an era where this new Cold War is marked by different methods of global governance and political economy, a country's sovereignty lies solely on its ability to become interdependent on not just one country, but a few other more. Giving too much economic dependency onto one country could lead to disastrous results, where a country would leverage a resource that another country is dependent on for political compromise and compliance. We shall discuss that in another video for another time. But China is beginning to do exactly that with its neighbors. Its drive for expansion and influence leads to offer delicious trade deals with other countries around it, deals that are often too good to refuse. As a result, countries are more willing to do more business with China, giving China more leverage over its neighbors, with more deals being more tasty, and soon the entirety of Southeast Asia and East Asia. Thank you for watching this episode of the Based Indonesian Show. Don't forget to click like and subscribe if you want to see more contents like this. And we will see you in the next episode of the Based Indonesian Show.